Hi, welcome to the Cinematography Salon Podcast, a show about celebrating cinematography and inspiring both the current and next generation of visual artists, exploring the latest trends, techniques, technologies, and culture, and featuring exclusive interviews with some of the most talented and innovative cinematographers working today. Hello, we're back, and today I'm joined by Oren Soffer and our guest, Kath Raisch. Kath is a senior colorist at Company3, and she has done amazing work for clients like Airbnb, Ulta, Ford, Gucci, ASOS, and so many more. Kath has worked on the films Aftersun and The Mother, which starred Jennifer Lopez, and she's been nominated for several AICP awards for her outstanding work, including Best Color Grading for Ulta's Muse in 2021 and FTX's Super Bowl commercial in 2022. Oren and I have both had the pleasure of working with Kath, and she has played a huge role in some of my favorite projects. Hi, Kath.
Hi, guys. How we doing?
Doing really well. So grateful to have you on today. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
I'm grateful.
Oh, well.
We're all grateful.
Yeah, I was reading a bit about your approach online and heard about the fact that you spent a lot of time in the darkroom. And that's something that really piqued my interest because over the pandemic, processing in the darkroom and printing in the darkroom was just one of the most valuable ways for me to hone my sensibility around color specifically, but also just cinematography in general. And so it clicked and it made so much sense that you have such a rich background in that. Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about going back to your days in the darkroom and whether you still like to work with film in the darkroom and how that's kind of affected your style for coloring.
Yeah. When I was young, I played soccer all the time, and I also picked up my dad's 35mm camera and started messing around with that. So in high school, I was like a huge jock playing soccer all the time. And then when I wasn't playing soccer, I was in our one-person darkroom in my high school and really loved that sanctuary. When I wasn't on the soccer field, I actually tried out for the national team for soccer. I just barely didn't make it. And
what could have been?
I know. And that sort of, I decided then and there, that was my junior year of high school, that then I would focus my college career on photo instead of soccer, which was my original plan.
Mm.
I mean, my entire career at RIT, I worked in darkrooms. I actually ran a photo lab there where we did film processing and inkjet mini lab and chromogenic printing. And I actually managed that for 3 years. And yeah, just sitting in the dark room and dodging and burning and, smelling all the chemicals and all that. That was.
Yeah. And was it at that point, was it color printing and processing or it was everything?
It was everything. Yeah. Yeah. RIT had the Kodak hookup. So they had hundreds of dark rooms at the time I was there.
Wow.
It's amazing.
They have since gotten rid of them, fortunately.
It's hard for me to put my finger on too, how it's added to my sort of outlook on cinematography. But what would you say, just sort of high level, that process of being there and working with your hands and really breaking down sort of the building blocks of the image, helped and how did that affect then what you do now?
Well, it definitely took me a while to get my bearings in terms of being the colorist that I am now, for sure. But once I gained some confidence and sort of broke it down and found the aesthetics that I really, really like, I realized that what I liked was what I used to do in the darkroom, which was just letting the film speak for itself, doing some dodging and burning here and there. Occasionally you'd have some fun with it and you go a little buck wild, but for the most part, yeah.
I think that's so huge. And I mean, yeah, it's funny because there's all these conversations about how the image is so malleable, and even with film, the amount of dynamic range in it and stuff, there's so much you can do with it. But I feel like that is in conflict with this idea that the image is the image and really you should let it speak for itself. And I loved hearing that that's kind of your mantra because I think it's so true. And I think it's even more true with film because you go out and you shoot an image on a piece of film, and then once you put it through that process of the darkroom, you're going to end up more or less with what you had at the onset. And it's just about the cleanliness of how well you're putting it through that pipeline. I think that there's so many correlations between that process, I think, and what you do now. And I think it's so interesting that informed it so much, and that was kind of how you arrived there.
Yeah, it's sort of instinctual, I think, is how I work these days. I think I just get too worried about having a look that somebody can pick out amongst others. And I'd rather just sort of be in the background of the project and just help it come to fruition without like putting my name on it. Like, this is Kath's color.
Right.
Yeah.
And that mentality is true of the greatest of the greats, this idea that it should be in service of the story. It should be in service of the original image. And I love that.
Yeah, exactly. Like philosophically, that really dovetails into like how I view cinematography, right? So it's very similar, but also with an aspect of it that is like an application of your taste, right? Because at the end of the day, it's like, why would people come to Color with Kath? Why do I love working with you? Is because like I want that taste application. So it's like finding a balance in there, which I think is really interesting. I wanted to ask, since we're touching on this subject of learning from darkroom film development processes and printing, like, do you notice a difference in the discipline of color that took place like in the transition to digital? Like I know from a cinematography standpoint, like I learned on film and I learned cinematography from exposing black and white reversal with 4 stops of dynamic range. And that's all you had. So like you had to nail your exposure. We did like one light processing. So, you could push or pull, but like we're not doing multiple printer lights like on a shot by shot basis. So you had to be really disciplined. And we also learned how to edit on flatbeds. So that's a whole other layer here. This was 13 years ago.
Yeah.
And there's a whole generation of filmmakers now who have come up with only digital tools and have never experienced the discipline and mentality of exposing film emulsion, developing film emulsion, and the discipline that comes from that. And I imagine that something similar happened with colorists, like with the advent of the DI, and how there's a lot of sort of more senior colorists these days who like came from film development and came from Technicolor and came from these companies that apply those disciplines into digital color. Have you noticed a change in the discipline of color grading as a new generation of colorists has come up with only digital tools and without the experience of photochemical film development? And do you think that we still need that discipline, or has digital color grading like evolved beyond that and become something new?
I think there's like a yearning for the new colorists to get that vibe back, which is why we feel so many projects sitting in that like print emulation zone, which is beautiful. And I certainly have a filmic aspect with everything that I color, but it's sort of a little overwhelming at times, where I think people need to really they need to look back at some of the old films that were done the old school analog way that didn't look like this like regurgitated form of print emulation that we see constantly.
Right. There can be there's that heightened version of print emulation in digital that is like very recognizable, where it just looks like a layer over top of it versus coming from the creative.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's totally a time and a place for that, and it's a vibe and it's a lot of fun. But I think realizing that these older films that were all done in an analog form don't look like that, and there's plenty of other places to take that world.
I guess for people who don't know, could you explain just a little bit about what we're talking about when we refer to print emulation, LUTs, and those kind of things as it applies to kind of your workflow and maybe when you're approached with that type of workflow?
Yeah, it's sort of like clamping the image to sit it within like a film space if you were to take your movie or whatever and print it back to film. So, there's like a deeper midtone S-curve that's applied. There's a creamier highlight that you start to feel immediately. There's like hue skews where, blues are kind of sitting cyan and whites are warm, and there's a little bit of like low-end coolness, some cyan in the blacks.
Super popular for sure.
Super popular, definitely, and it's beautiful. I think maybe a timeout is due.
Yeah, timeout, totally. I think that it's interesting thinking about the company you work for, like Company3, and how much of a look, as a whole, I think Company3 is like created this really distinct, beautiful, high-end look. And I'm sure they were using some of these techniques of print emulation and stuff before it became so popular, and probably leveraging that look to distinguish and stuff. I'd be curious to hear about your path to becoming a senior colorist at Company3, and just generally what your journey has been from working the night shift there and being able to look at dailies and working as an assistant colorist all the way through to where you are now as a senior colorist working there.
Yeah, I mean, it was a long, tough road, gotta say. Did a lot of that overnight stuff. It was like digital dust busting, like cleaning dust digitally off of movies. And then I did like overnight dailies for logging and syncing, not color purposes. And then I started working in overnight commercial conform so that I could get closer to the colorists. And Tom Poole, senior colorist at Company3, liked that I had an interest and took me on as, a mentor. And so I sat with him in a darkroom for like 2.5 years and just watched him work. And I mean, he colored Drive, which was like heavily print emulation, which was sort of maybe a starting point to that whole, that's always a reference constantly, even till this day.
Yeah, I think that movie was really a turning point in like digital acquisition, film emulation, like heavy DI in order to create like a distinct look and feel that, I feel like we're feeling the reverberations of that till today for sure.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, that movie looked amazing. That movie was sick.
Yeah, stunning.
So yeah, I mean, I just watched him, for a couple of years and saw how he engaged with clients. And somewhere along those lines, I met you and a bunch of other NYU kids, including Charlotte Wells. Just started coloring whatever I could get my hands on to make a reel. And then by the time I felt confident enough in my reel to share it, I shared it with Tom and Stefan Sonnenfeld, and they liked it enough to bump me up.
First off, of course they did, as they should have. But
quit it.
No, so two things. One is I have to say, like from my perspective, what I've always really loved at color houses, Company3 does this really well, and I've seen some other color houses that apply a similar structure. Is there's like a really old school mentor-mentee sort of apprenticeship approach to it, where you start off as an assistant and then maybe get some opportunities as a junior colorist, and you get to learn from the senior colorists and sit in the room and grade. It's basically like the colorist version of an in-betweener from animation. Like a senior colorist sets looks, and then the junior colorist like matches the looks across the film, and you get so much practice from that. And as a DP, I think this is something I've talked about before that I feel is very lacking in production, that sort of one-to-one mentorship type thing. So I really think that's great. How does it work, and how did it work for you within the structure of Company3 to then seek out the types of projects that would build a reel for yourself? Like, how did you approach finding the filmmakers and curating that for yourself? And was there a thought process there? Like, was there a deliberate, like, I'm going to work on, this project would be really good, and this one would be really good, and this one would be really good, so I'm going to like find the time and make time to make sure that I can grade those, even if they don't have a lot of money?
Yeah, no, I mean, there was no thought process. I just took whatever I could get, and like luckily with NYU, I made a lot of connections with you guys over there, and somehow it stuck, and then sort of my name would get passed around, I guess. We really try hard to make room for that regardless of the budget, any chance that we can. We all of us really want to try to work on as much as we can, and we think it's really important also to help out up-and-coming directors and DPs as well. So we've been really trying hard to do that for the last decade or so. I mean, I've only been there for like 12 years, but
only 12 years.
I imagine they were doing that to some degree before. But yeah, we're always trying to do that, make room for that.
One question I had was like, just thinking about you mentioning Tom Poole and Drive and how that colors had such a long-lasting impact. I read in an article that you mentioned that Spencer really took your breath away, like color-wise. And I think that the thing about color for people outside of our industry and even in our industry, is that it is kind of like this sort of elusive thing where it's hard to pinpoint like what exactly is that part of the process that's taking your breath away or setting a look for years to come or things like that. From your perspective of someone who's so experienced and so steeped in this, I'd love to hear why Spencer spoke to you from a color standpoint.
It might just be because of the aesthetic that I prefer that's just like natural. And I mean, that was film and you could really feel it. And I think it was just that. It was just, I've never had that sort of reaction to something before. And that was really exciting. It's more just like leaning into the photography itself than putting like a stylistic look on it, I guess.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
I mean, when I think about your work and the projects that we've done together and everything, and then the fact that you like that film so much, it makes a lot of sense. Like just that kind of effortless quality and...
Completely effortless. That is the word.
Effortless, yeah. And like non-distracting and sort of, yeah, soft. And I mean, Oren and I have literally talked about how the projects we've done with you, it's like, there's literally no way to describe it. Like, and it exists in this, I don't know, realm of brilliance that we can't quite put our finger on. And
you guys.
It's funny. No, it really is funny. It's like, it's true. And it's like, I don't get it. I mean, Oren probably gets it more than I do.
I don't get it either. And actually, we want to ask you about the colorist relationship with the DP, which I think is sort of a very broad topic, but something that people are probably most interested in and comes up a lot as a question. But first, I'll talk a little bit about the relationship of the DP with the colorist. And for me personally, like that relationship is very interesting because I don't feel very confident in like my technical acumen to describe what I want in color. It's more of a feeling and it's more of a vibe and it's more of like a sort of, I know it when I see it. And like, I just want to work with colorists whose taste aligns with mine and that I can trust. And that's the process for me, I think, for better and worse, because I think the worst side of that is that sometimes for various reasons, you end up on a project where you have not had a say in the choice of colorist and you have to sort of work with somebody to like express your taste and desire. And I can't do it. And like, I get very self-conscious about that. Whereas that's why it's like, whenever I can, I try to get people to hire Kath or hire, whoever, because I'm like, I can just trust you. Like, I can just trust that your taste, you'll understand what the intention of the footage was and that there is an effortlessness to it. So I'm curious, like, what the inverse of that is like for you, because I'm sure that you work with DPs that have different approaches to that, like some who like that and want the effortlessness and just want to hand it off and be like, I trust your taste and I trust your gut. Like you will understand what we were trying to do, versus people who come in and maybe try to get a little more technical or try to be clever or whatever it is. What is that relationship like from your end?
So it's like 90% of our job to try to translate what is in somebody else's brain onto the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And most people don't know how to talk about color, but that was sort of an invaluable lesson I learned from working with Tom. And I also, assisted almost all of the colorists at Company3 when I was assisting him. So just hearing how they interpret what people are spouting at them, because you also might have 6 people in a room that are all saying 7 different things that feel like they're completely the opposite of what the other person is saying, but there's something that you can like land on in your head. It's definitely like instinctual and like total like gut process for me, but I always end up getting there, which is, I don't know how to explain it, I guess.
Yeah. Like, what do you do when you have, I mean, I don't want to throw any specific person under the bus, but like a client or somebody in that realm, like producer, I don't know, maybe, who doesn't necessarily know what they're after or how to express their thoughts and ideas, or maybe are asking for things that are not possible to do in the color grade. Like brass tacks, how do you handle those situations? Like, I feel like that's probably something that colorists have to know how to navigate. What's your go-to approach? What have you learned from the other colorists at Company3?
I think everybody has their own tactics for this. I personally, I'm down to try anything for sure. I have an idea of how I think something should be, and I get that idea from watching it down and getting a feel for the footage, and then maybe looking at references from the DP or director. But like, I'm down to try anything once, and if I think it's not going in the direction that it should, I will say it for sure.
Right.
But sometimes you can get an interesting vibe from trying that thing that you thought maybe couldn't possibly work. But yeah, I mean, if the footage isn't giving it to me, which I think is the most important thing, I really don't like pushing footage to a place that it shouldn't be, just because, you know, there was a still of something on a mood board that somebody wants to match to. If it's not there, it's not there, and I think it's important to not push the footage to that place if it's can be avoided.
What would you say, if you have anything, is like a piece of practical advice you would give to cinematographers coming into the grading process who maybe are like coming up, younger, don't necessarily have the experience of working with a professional colorist? Like, maybe what are some pitfalls that you've noticed in the past that you think people can maybe learn about to like better prepare themselves for that kind of collaboration?
I want to say two things, because I think it's also important to mention that like us colorists are here for you guys as DPs. Like, we want to make sure that you guys get everything that you need, and then also be there for the directors in terms of making sure that their vision is exactly how they wanted it to be. I think it's important for up-and-coming DPs to actually be in a room with a colorist who's experienced and see if their vision actually came across in the footage that they shot. And what we have to do as colorists to get it to that spot. Yeah, I think it's actually a really good learning experience, because we get really up close and personal to your footage. And I think it's good for DPs to see exactly kind of what we have to do to get it to a place. And then maybe you guys can learn for your next one, like, oh, maybe I should have done this.
I've definitely had experiences with colors where I've provided a note and they're like, oh, so you want me to add a little light over here? Like kind of like a little bitter, like, oh, you want me to add some negative fill? I think that's sort of what you're getting at a little bit, in the sense that ideally you've done that already, and that, you know, the color isn't requiring the heavy lifting of like relighting the scene or whatever. And so, yeah, I can, like, it makes a ton of sense why that for up and coming DPs is so valuable to be there. Because I think also in our industry now, it's like, back in the day when you could watch dailies on a big screen and really pick apart the image, like nowadays you shoot and you monitor on set and then you just kind of let it go and it goes through a pipeline and stuff. But it's like that ability to really look at the image and to have a great colorist that is willing to like go on that journey with you and like really pick it apart and really look at every little tiny detail of it is something that I do think is sort of getting lost in some sense. And I mean, yeah, it definitely brings up the question of like workflows now, and I'd love to hear from you about how you've seen that change, like over the course of your time coloring, whether you're seeing a lot less in-person sessions or how you manage remote sessions. And if you could just speak a little bit about the changes over time in terms of the workflow.
Yeah, COVID definitely shifted things for sure. I do actually work mostly virtually, which I would have totally lost a bet. A lot of agency people left New York, and I guess over COVID I've made a lot more clients like elsewhere other than New York. It's for sure a bummer, because being in person, you know, and the camaraderie in a bay and all that is definitely missed. But I do really love having access to working at home, because I always have it gives me the opportunity to work on more stuff in a way. I'm very much a morning person, so if I feel like hopping on the box to continue working on a feature I've got going on in the background or whatever, I have access to it. And, you know, it's been helping me get in some more low budget stuff. And then, you know, I get to have a life on top of that, which I guess I haven't. When I, you know, look back in the last 12 years, I feel like I have a little bit more of a life now.
Yeah, I mean, working night shifts is probably pretty difficult to
brutal
achieving the work-life balance. And
brutal.
Yeah, that's definitely a common thing in people coming up in the color world, isn't it?
Yeah, post is like 24/7, or at least it was.
I think it might be cool too to just jump back and talk a little bit about, I'm curious about this whole mood board reference thing, because it's like a question that I really have too, where, yeah, I'm curious what your experience has been with receiving references that are maybe like very far from what the source footage is and how you navigate that. Because I've been in situations where maybe it's a client or an agency person or sometimes a director, but it's like, I think references when it comes to lighting and when it comes to shooting can be anything. It can be a painting, it can be fine art photograph, it could be many different things, and it can lead to an end result that sort of reflects that. But I think that for what I see is that like there's a misconception that you can also change everything at that stage via just like a reference. And so when I hear the like term, we need like some references for color, sometimes it trips me up because I'm like, well, we shot and we monitored with a look and, you know, yeah, we're going to like fine tune it, but providing references that are helpful or constructive, like how do you navigate that, and like what do you think works? And have you ever had an experience where someone has given you a reference that's like really, really different than the footage, and that somehow that's helped, or like what works the best, I guess, in that sense when it comes to references?
I definitely think it's important that for every project I have access to what you guys were shooting with, if you had like a LUT on set or whatever. I mean, most of the time I know that's like that specific LUT that is chosen for a reason. So it like that already gives me an idea of where you guys are heading, if you're heading into the filmic space or black and white, like whatever. I mean, otherwise, I constantly get mood boards that are all over the place. Paintings, you'll get like shots of Drive mixed with Spencer, and then you're like, what am I looking at? But I mean, that doesn't throw me off. I normally will pick out a few that I think work best for the footage that I'm given.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, if in the room somebody's like, I want to push it more, let's go a little more stylized, let's go a little bit more closer to Drive, you know, we can maybe try to go down that road. But I don't mind getting references. I think it's nice to have access again to inside your brains, for sure. And I know you like to give your own little color grades.
How do you feel about that? I mean, that's something that's really interesting. I feel like, Oren, do you do that at all? Like, do you ever provide colors, like graded frames?
I wanted to ask you about that. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, Kath. I don't do it because I'm a bad colorist. Because I'm
Same.
Like I was mentioning before, like I'm bad at it. Like I can't bring an image into Resolve and grade it and then send it and be like, this is what I want. That's, I think, a problem for me. But it results in me being able to work with colorists like you, where I'm just like, I need you because I need your taste and your eye, because I can't do it myself. But yeah, for you specifically, but also, I don't know, in the larger colorist community, like, do you guys talk about this? Oh, these DPs that grade their own stills and send them to us and be like, this is what we want it to look like. Like, how is that received in the colorist community?
Well, you know, shit, it's your footage. So what can I say? But I don't have a problem with that. I think it's nice to, you know, if you have trouble communicating like verbally, you can send me something that's a place that you think you like, and then I can sort of translate that with the footage that I got and the vibe that I felt for the film, and also maybe your additional mood board references or whatever, and sort of bring them all into one.
I love that
idea. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like, yeah, it's really cool to hear that overall it's about the collaboration. I think that's so huge. And there's parallels with us too, where it's like even like a director maybe shooting something on their iPhone and being like, this is the coverage I want. Like these are the beats of the scene that I want, and like recreate that. And, you know, I feel like there was a time where if I received like a no like that or something, I'd be like, oh, like, you know, what's my role here? But we talked a lot on the show about how, like, I don't know, at a certain point, it's like really just about letting go of the ego and kind of just trying to help the thing be born, and whatever
exactly
avenues you take to that end result. And it sounds like that's really your kind of mantra too, which is really cool to hear.
I mean, I think we all have maybe a little bit of ego being in this business, and of course it's much more enjoyable to have some creative control, but I don't need all of it. And I just colored my first big studio movie, and there's a lot more cooks in the kitchen with those, and studios get say, even can trump the DP and director, and I sort of had to relinquish most of my creative control for that project, which I'd never had to do before. Maybe like time to time commercial or whatever here and there, but that was interesting.
Yeah.
Isn't it funny how we like work our way, we like develop our voice and like figure out how to navigate these things, and then like and then you get to a point where the end goal, or like the thing that you've been working toward, is someone requiring you to relinquish all that control and all that creativity. And it's like a little bit counterintuitive the way that path works.
It's the same for DPs, by the way, at that level, right? Like,
Yeah.
or at least it can be. I mean, it certainly depends on the film, but more often than not, I think DPs also end up relinquishing a lot of creative control on a
100%.
film at that size. So it's like, it's the same dynamic.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the title of that film, or a little bit about that experience at all, if you feel like it? Or
So that was The Mother. It's a J-Lo movie on Netflix, action movie.
Yeah.
My first intro to action as well. It was so much more work than I would have thought. And I had 3 weeks to do it.
Oh my God.
And I mean, one nice thing was I actually spent more time with the DP, Ben Saracen, than I have ever spent with a DP on a project up to that time. So, I mean, he and I got to really dive in together every day and get it to where he likes it.
So was that experience remote, or were you all able to do
No,
it?
that was in person. I went out to LA for that one.
Wow, very
Nice. Kath, I wanted to ask, this is something we touched on before. Do you take into account at all, for better or worse, trends in aesthetics and trends in color? Is that a consideration for you at all? For example, for me, on the film that I have coming out later this year, that as we were grading it, like, a part of us, I think we're all a little self-aware of a certain sort of negative perception trend of films being too dark these days, and that whole discourse, which we can get into, but it may be better saved for another podcast. But it was something, I think, for better, that we were conscious of as we were grading, where we're sort of like, we don't want this film to feel like that. We don't want anyone to end up watching this and be like, oh, I couldn't see anything, it was too dark. Like, we were really conscious about making sure that there was a healthy dynamic range of exposure within each image, even really dark and moody images. And I think it made the look better, but it did require us to sort of have like a self-consciousness of what I think may be perceived as a negative trend, to then like go against it a little bit intentionally. So yeah, is that something that you think about at all?
All the time. I'm totally a contrarian, so
Yeah.
I'm like always, it's probably not the best trait of mine, but yeah, I'm always thinking I want to do the opposite, or I want to stay away from this trend or whatever, in like literally everything I do, professionally and personally. But you know, sometimes there's just a time and a place for those things to happen, and you know, that's again this sort of like letting go of the ego thing and just giving the people what they want, which I think is important. I mean, in the end, those are the viewers. They're the reason maybe we can get a second project or whatever. So
I mean, yeah, going off that too, it's like, where do you think that sort of contrarian quality for you started, or where did that sort of sensibility of wanting to buck trends and kind of go in a different direction, like, and also I think I'm curious, like, at what point did you kind of really realize that being a colorist was the right kind of path for you, and yeah, how did that come to be?
well, I think I've been a contrarian my entire life, I'm pretty sure. And then when when 6 Feet Under came out, which is like literally, I think it's the best show that's ever been made.
My favorite TV show of all time.
Nothing will be better.
Yeah. Have we not talked about this? I didn't realize
We
you
have
also
not talked about this, but I'm completely obsessed with that show.
I've seen it 3 times through from beginning to end. Like,
Oh, I've
Probably
watched it
more.
probably once a year. Yeah.
yeah, I'm
So
overdue.
when it aired in 2001, I was
Yeah.
like, oh my God, Claire is me. Like, I am that person. Like, this is me. Like, and then I could see my life through this movie and totally related to her in so many ways. And, you know, she was kind of a contrarian as well.
And a photographer.
And a photographer. Exactly. It all, I was like, oh my God, this is me. How I chose to become a colorist. I had this like imaging science class, and this professor came in to class one day and said, I was just hanging with a buddy in New York City who sits in dark rooms all day coloring movies. And I'd never heard that before, but I was like studying color science in his class, and I was constantly in darkrooms all the time. That was like my sanctuary at school. And I was like, what is this? And like, how do I take the steps to get there? I ended up talking to him and the head of the cinema department at RIT to see if they could like let me take a couple of cinema classes to like to add to my major so that, you know, and they did, and they quickly realized that that was probably a mistake, but they did end up after I did it connecting the two photo and cinema departments because of that, because they saw how important it was in the grand scheme.
How do you think that like your education experience differs from others who have entered into the coloring world? Like all these colorists that you assisted, did you get a sense from them how they arrived where they did, or also like up and comers, like people now? Like what do you see? Do you have a sense of what people study to enter that profession at this point?
I think most of us just worked our way up. You know, I think Tom Poole started out as a runner, so I think we all just started from the bottom and kind of express interest. And I was like born with this like blue collar mentality of work till you die type of thing. So I just said yes to whatever and worked and had no social life for a long time.
It's so true, Oren, your point about, the mentor-mentee relationship in cinematography, how that's lacking, because like, when you hear of like cinematographers like finding their way now, it's never the story of like, I stuck with this person and they showed me the ropes. It's more like I figured it out online, or like, I don't know.
Exactly.
Made
my own way, that kind of thing. I mean, even with the DP colorist relationship, like I think a hurdle that I had to get over for myself in the early years was like feeling like an idiot in the color suite, and like feeling like if I asked a dumb question about something I didn't understand, that I would just be like showing my cards, you know, that I didn't know what I was talking about. And so it prevented me, I think, from like being very inquisitive and very curious in the color grading process, in that like one-on-one situation that you were describing, Kath, that's so powerful about it, like being able to sit with the DP and colorist early on in a DP's career in order to like be able to ask those questions and just be open and be curious and inquisitive and not feel ashamed that, you know, you don't know this. So like that's something I definitely encourage, but it can be tricky.
I mean, I hope you never feel stupid asking a question or saying, you know, I don't know, saying some adjective that you think describes what you want and it's completely random. It's kind of the same on my end, though. I'm not a technical colorist. There's definitely a lot of technical colorists. So sometimes I'll feel stupid, like, oh, this was this lens? Like, oh, interesting.
Right.
You know, like, that's why I'm having such a hard time coloring this one shot, because you guys had a pickup shoot and you didn't get your lens that you shot the whole rest of the movie with. And like, okay. I'm constantly learning every single day with every single project. I mean, the stuff that I learned recently on The Mother was like invaluable.
Kath, we wanted to ask you about another project that you worked on. Last year, you color graded the film Aftersun, which was one of my favorite movies of last year. Like, it was in my top 3. It's a masterpiece, if anybody hasn't seen it. And that film received top awards at the Cannes Film Festival in Berlin, as well as some Oscar nominations and a BAFTA win for Charlotte, the director. So can you talk a little bit about your experience working on that project, and maybe give us a little bit of insight into the look of that film and your collaboration with Charlotte, the director, and the DP of that project?
Yeah, I mean, Charlotte Wells, the director, and Greg Oakes, the DP, and also Blair McClendon, the editor, we go back a ways. They also went to NYU and were some of the clients that I started working with when I was first originally assisting and trying to build my own reel and my own clients. And I've worked on most of their projects over the years, which is amazing. That trio is ridiculously gifted. But yeah, the color process was pretty simple, I guess, in a lot of ways. It was shot beautifully on 35. And Charlotte's idea was to make it feel like our childhood vacation snapshots, which are, point and shoot camera, process in your like CVS mini lab, everything's slightly magenta. Everybody's got like rosy cheeks and, like it feels like summer without being like warm. It just felt like bright and hot and, sunburnt and a little magenta. And yeah, I mean, then I just let the 35 kind of do its thing, really.
So
cool.
I love it. Yeah. No, I mean, that film I think is such a great example of this sort of balance that we've been talking about where like it has a look, it has an identity that is designed to evoke a very specific feeling and a very specific time period and a very specific type of nostalgia, but it's not in your face about it. Like it's very organic and it just feels like such a natural part of the project and the film and dovetails so well in also the way they shot it and like the static camera compositions and everything like feeds into this concept, but it's so committed to it that you don't notice it because it's just a tapestry of the movie. Like it's just part of anyway, I could gush about it forever, but
Thank you.
It's interesting too because it's like what you were saying, Oren, about like being worried about asking the wrong questions and stuff. It's like I'm thinking about parallels to a cinematography where it's like you could be working with the most experienced director and you could be a little nervous about your technical ability and what kind of questions to ask or what kind of questions they might come to you with, and then you realize that like the people who are at the highest level like might ask you a question as simple as like, how does this make you feel, And then you realize like, oh, there actually are no rules to this whole thing. And it's actually very simple. And it's really just about serving the story and serving the emotion. And yeah, like to hear that Aftersun was made with like such an intimate group of people that were all aligned and like all had sort of a singular like approach that was based on something very nostalgic. It's like, yeah, of course it came out so beautifully because there wasn't any, fear of not doing it right or like, it made sense from the onset. And I think that's, super interesting.
Yeah, the three of us, I got to go to London for that, which was also cool. But actually 2 days into that, I got COVID and then all hell broke loose. But, back when you couldn't leave that country before you tested out. But
oh, God. Well,
it turned out amazing.
Yeah.
So, Kath, before we started recording, you told us a little bit about some future projects coming up, and we'd love to just hear kind of what's next for you and what you're excited about in the future.
I have a bunch of indie features coming up that I'm super excited about. A couple with the DP Rob Leitzel from Black Bear. If you guys saw that years back at Sundance.
Great movie with Aubrey Plaza.
Amazing movie. That's underrated.
Absolutely.
It's hilarious.
Dark and hilarious and weird.
Dark and hilarious, yes.
Yeah.
Awkward.
Yep. Yeah, I love that movie. That's great.
Yeah, I've got some with him and a handful of others. I'm not entirely sure when they're happening, but they're all like shooting currently or just finished. So I'm really excited for those. And then, the normal day-to-day, I love doing commercials, actually. It's like a lovely palate cleanser and keeps me motivated and keeps the creative juices flowing. Being able to like hop on multiple projects in one day keeps it interesting.
Yeah, Kath, I'm curious to hear, you talked a bit about your experience coming up at Company3, and I'd love to hear a little bit about any sort of mentorship efforts that you've undertaken with more junior colorists and how you approach that and what value you see in kind of doing that and keeping the wheel turning with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I love doing that as much as I possibly can, and I try to be available for any assistants coming up that are trying to learn as I did. It's really tough being almost always virtual, which is, a huge roadblock that we've been trying to work through, but we've figured out clever ways to get around it. But yeah, I really think it's important to be there as much as I can for the assistants who really do want to become a colorist and put the time in on their own or off hours, kind of the way that I did, to learn and build their eye and understand the whole process. So I try to do it for as many assistants as I can. And we do have a bunch coming up now that are doing great.
So cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. Maybe in the show notes, we can like drop some links to some of the up-and-coming colorists at Company3. So if
that'd be
anyone
cool.
is listening and looking for colorists for their projects, like
Uh-huh.
who are maybe more in the up-and-coming DP world,
100%.
maybe they could make some connections. And I mean, like, I know for me, it was really huge to forge this relationship with you, Kath, early on, and to not feel intimidated by the idea of reaching out to Company3 and
Yeah.
like forming that relationship. Because I think that that's a mental barrier that exists for a lot of people that is
Yep.
artificial, because it's not actually there, like we talked about before. It just requires the gumption to just say, like, yeah, no, I mean, I understand that there are people who are up and coming within this company and who are looking to create these relationships with up and coming DPs. And like, there is no barrier preventing you from doing that.
Absolutely no. But it is, that's a common misconception for sure, which is understandable. We're, a very big, well-known company that works on very big, huge things. So I totally understand why that thought is there. But yeah, never hesitate.
Well, Kath, thank you so much for your time today and your wisdom. And this was such a blast. And yeah, we really appreciate it. We're excited for people to hear this.
I know. Thank you. I'm like so humbled.
This is great. This is going to be a good one. Thanks again.
Thank you guys so much.
This episode of the Cinematography Salon Podcast was produced by Peter Pascucci, Oren Soffer, and David Kruta, with original music by One Wave. We created this episode in partnership with the Cinematography Salon, and we would like to extend a special thanks to the salon community for sourcing topics for this episode. If you enjoyed listening to the episode, we encourage you to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media to stay up to date with our latest episodes and news. Thanks.